Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, Bangkok, the sequel, the players, the protesters, and the media's role in the power struggle. Drones, they don't just operate in the dark over Pakistan, they can shed light on news stories in Istanbul. Journalists, more than 50 of them, take a beating in Kiev. And it's a phone, it's not a lifestyle. Get off the phone, it's gonna be okay. That's our web video of the week. The streets of the Thai capital, Bangkok, have been teeming with protesters, scenes reminiscent of the demonstrations there back in 2010. Only the tables have turned, the roles reversed. And once again, the media are a big part of the story. The demonstrators are demanding the removal of Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra. She's the sister of Thaksin Shinawatra, a one-time cable TV magnate who was prime minister until he was deposed in a coup in 2006. During those protests in 2010, Thaksin Shinawatra was in exile, but he used his media holdings to beam messages to Thailand and call people out onto the streets. This time, the unrest has been spearheaded by a group called the People's Democratic Reform Committee, the PDRC, which says Prime Minister Shinawatra is illegitimate because, they argue, she's just a puppet of her brother's and he's pulling the strings from Dubai. Got all that? Because it gets more complicated. PDRC protesters aren't just going after Shinawatra's government, they've been occupying some TV stations, demanding that those stations broadcast their political statements in their entirety, and they're getting some joy. Thailand has a factionalized media landscape. It's not the only country that must deal with that. However, the outright hijacking of the airwaves by a movement that calls itself democratic is just another twist in the Thai political story. Our starting point this week is Bangkok. Simply put, the news divide in Thailand lies between what is reported on the country's 6 analog TV channels, 5 of which are owned by the government or the military, and what is delivered digitally through another 48 channels that are privately owned. And the two sides tell different versions of the story of the protest movement, the PDRC and its leader, Suthep Thakksuban.
In every political confrontation in Thailand, the media has been targeted by one side or the other, or sometimes both, because the media is deeply divided themselves. And in the latest showdown this time, Suthep and his supporters mobilized thousands of people to free TV stations to pressure them. First of all, to stop reporting information from the government, and secondly, to report more favorable stories about the protests.
I see Mr. Suthep's movement as reflecting an intimidation to the media. But I can see that where that was coming from, because he was feeling that he wasn't getting a fair share of the broadcast in the free TV channel. And as we know, free TV channels, most of them are under government control. So that's why the People's Army, controlled by Suthep, felt the need to do that.
Be in no doubt, ever since Yingluck won the general election in 2011, the Yellow Shirts have been planning for this day. They have been waiting for the moment when Yingluck will try and bring her brother Thaksin back into Thailand. She did that recently with the amnesty bill. She tried to do it. The Yellow Shirts are mobilized, and I think part of their mobilization plan is to quickly paralyze the Thai economy and the Thai government and the Thai media. So therefore I think they have deliberately targeted the TV stations as a way to get their message across and to achieve maximum impact.
The protesters demonstrated that when they converged on the TV channels owned by the government, complaining their story was not being told and insisting that that statement issued by the PDRC leader be broadcast in full. 5 of the 6 channels complied.
ถ่ายทอดเฉพาะข่าวจากกปปสและการรายงานสถานการณ์จริง
Back in 2010, during the red shirt protests, the Shinawats were the opposition. The protesters who wanted to bring back Thaksin were up against the government installed after his overthrow, plus the media outlets that government had at its disposal. When Thaksin's sister won the 2011 election, the Shinawats inherited government-owned TV, and now it's the new opposition that's on the streets.
The media landscape in Thailand is deeply divided by the color-coded confrontations, between the faction that believe in Thaksin Shinawatra and see him first of all, as an agent for broader reform, which can be broadly considered as the red shirt camp. And on the other hand, we have almost the same number who see Thaksin as the worst enemy of the nation, who would challenge the monarchy. And each time there is a political conflict, the division in the media landscape will play out very strongly.
So you're seeing different factions, political factions, representing the polarization of Thai politics. And they're trying to establish their power through the media. Like the Blue Sky channel has clear connection with the Democrat Party. You have Voice TV, which belongs to the Shinawatra family, and a number of others, and a lot of them have clear partisanship to different political factions.
And that doesn't just apply to the national media, it extends way into the provinces, into the other towns and cities in Thailand, where you'll find radio stations and TV channels as well who are affiliated to various political groups, and their only goal, their only purpose is to broadcast messages about that political group and to also spend a lot of time criticizing the opposition.
During the unrest in 2010, Thaksin Shinawatra was in exile, but visible in video messages, exhorting protesters to hit the streets. These days, he is out of sight, avoiding the perception that he is the power behind his sister's government. The international media portray Thailand as a country of two camps.
These mainly urban protesters.
Wealthy Thais, Bangkok-based, who oppose the Shinawatras, versus rural Thais, particularly in the farmlands of the Northeast, who back whoever the family puts on the ballot.
They have a great deal of support from the north, from the rural poor.
The story, as usual, is more complex than that.
Thaksin has been a symbol of the most dynamic and capable of the new business class in Thailand, which has fundamentally challenged the old elites. He got rich very quickly. His company was also the first one to launch Thailand's first satellite for telecommunications. And that sort of presents him as like the face of the future. He's very good at portraying himself on TV and everything else. He remains powerful basically because he has become so rich.
The political crisis in Thailand is extremely complicated, and I think it's very difficult for most people to understand, let alone for the media to describe it in simple terms. So it does boil down to, in a lot of cases, this analogy that it is the rich versus the poor. And there are some truths to that, but it is also about a very small group of wealthy people centered in Bangkok, the capital city mainly, and it is also about a small group of wealthy people who come from other areas, these two groups battling for control of the country.
The international news agency tend to focus on that usual formula between the rich and the poor, and if there is a civilian elected government, the villain is always the military coup. But nobody is really getting what a Thaksin regime is. I mean, to me, it's a new dynasty in itself. And a lot of people felt that this is not democratic. This is a new dynasty establishing itself on a widespread nepotism, cronyism, and a huge amount of wealth.
Our Global Village voices now on the media side of the political story in Thailand.
Most of Thai free TV and radio are conservative because they are owned by the military, while some satellite TV are funded by political parties. And I believe that the leader of the protesters understand the fact that who controls the media controls the mind of the people.
We have to realize that the media are a very important field in the ongoing cultural struggle in the Kingdom of Thailand. Thailand is still very much an ideological society where propaganda is funneled through the media and especially the television. Both sides in Thailand's ongoing political crisis are harming the professional media.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. In Ukraine, press freedom groups have strongly criticized attacks against journalists covering the largest anti-government demonstrations the country has seen in nearly a decade. Protesters have been on the streets across the country demanding the resignation of the president, Viktor Yanukovych, because of his government's refusal to sign a deal that would forge closer links with the EU. According to credible reports, at least 51 local and international journalists have been injured, and had their equipment damaged while covering the story. This clip shows riot police beating a cameraman from Euronews. The victim, Roman Kiprianov, said, "The guy who tried to save me was shouting, 'He's press, leave him alone.' But this didn't have any effect." Other victims include local journalist Denis Danko, who was reportedly beaten, and Reuters journalist Gleb Gerinich. On December the 2nd, a day after the worst of the protests, President Yanukovych gave one interview, which aired on 4 different channels, in which he played down the protests. In Pakistan, 3 people have been wounded in an attack on a newspaper group, the second time this year that organization has been targeted. Gunmen were reported to have fired shots and hurled at least 2 hand grenades at the building of the Karachi-based Express Media Group. No one has claimed responsibility, but the Taliban lead the list of reported suspects, and the motives being mooted include some positive coverage the Express recently gave a cricket player from India, Sachin Tendulkar, on the occasion of his retirement. Pakistan's Federal Union of Journalists condemned the attack and called on the authorities to track down the culprits. But Pakistan has a dreadful record on this issue. At least 5 journalists have been killed this year, more than 40 over the past decade, and none of those who have murdered Pakistani journalists in the past 10 years has ever been brought to justice. In Egypt, 2 high-profile bloggers have become the latest victims of a new law that prohibits unauthorized protests in the country. Allah Abdul Fattah and Ahmed Duma were arrested within days of each other after the authorities accused them of violating the recently adopted protest law. That law came into effect last month. It bans anyone from demonstrating without first notifying the police. Fattah was arrested after he organized a rally in Cairo. He faces charges that include thuggery, inciting violence, and resisting the authorities. Following Fattah's arrest, Ahmed Duma tweeted that he'd been taken into custody on December the 2nd. He faces similar charges, including stirring chaos, for his role in a recent protest. On these developments, Tamara Al-Rafai from Human Rights Watch said, "All this is to be seen against the background of the new protest law and the crackdown that's been going on for 3 or 4 months now. There's zero sense of accountability. There's zero sense that this is wrong. There's zero sense that we should not be doing this in the new Egypt." Alan Rusbridger, the editor of Britain's Guardian newspaper, has issued a tough defense of his newspaper's role in publishing stories about mass surveillance carried out by British and American intelligence agencies. On December 3rd, Rusbridger gave evidence to a parliamentary committee after his paper carried a series of stories based on the leaks provided by former NSA contractor Edward Snowden. During the hour-long session, Rusbridger was forced to defend his patriotism.
I love this country. Do you love this country?
Most of the people working on this story are British people who have families in this country who love this country. I'm slightly surprised to be asked the question, but...
He argued it was in the public interest to expose the level of snooping by the agencies and that the story had sparked an international debate. When asked why The Guardian has been attacked over the story, he said, "Shooting the messenger is the oldest diversionary trick in the book. I can't think of any story in recent times that has ricocheted around the world like this and which has been more broadly debated." Following Rusbridger's testimony, the same committee announced it had summoned Andrew Parker, the head of the British spy agency MI5, to provide justification for his claims that The Guardian had endangered national security by publishing the leaks. Parker will face questioning on that this coming week. When someone says the word drone, it is usually followed by the word strike. Given the stories we keep hearing out of places like Pakistan and Yemen, we've become conditioned to think of drones as weapons of war. They are also becoming tools of the journalistic trade. Whether you realize it or not, more and more news stories, particularly those on television, now include video shot by drones. There are still a lot of issues to be worked out, some of them technological, some ethical. But drones are becoming part of the news gathering process, and because they can provide a different perspective and they're not as expensive as one might think, you can bet that they're here to stay. The Listening Post's Will Young now on the potential and some of the pitfalls of the unmanned eye in the sky.
Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. A camera carried by an unmanned aerial vehicle, or UAV, floats overhead, high enough to capture the scale of the destruction, yet close enough to convey the detail and the depth of the tragedy. The footage, shot by a British freelancer, was picked up by CNN, who also hired him to shoot their reporter on the scene.
The possibility for drones in the hands of journalists and activists it's really quite significant. It seems obvious at the moment that if you want to show widespread devastation after a fire or environmental problems, that drones can help illustrate that. If you're at a protest and you have a drone, you can, for example, put a drone up in the air and see the tactics that the police are using, see the extent of it, and really give a kind of whole different illustrative angle to the coverage that you're trying to produce.
And it's at political protests where drones are getting closest to where news is breaking. A drone shot the demonstrations that have shaken Bangkok this week, and the footage quickly became part of the mainstream media coverage. But it was at the Occupy protests of 2011 where journalist Tim Poole first saw how a drone could help report times of civil unrest.
I've known about drones and remote control airplanes and blimps and all that stuff, but it wasn't until there was this particular protest in Boston where the police formed a line and they were blocking the press from being able to film the arrests happening behind them that I started to think, what can I do that's legal to circumvent their blockade? And a friend of mine suggested we grab a couple of these drones, send them straight into the sky, we'll have an aerial shot, totally legal, we'll get a better vantage point. How can we incorporate this?
In the Gezi Park protests in Turkey, when tens of thousands of people were clashing with police, the whole time I was there, I did not see a single news camera flying over the place.
There was another guy, goes by the name of Jinx, online, who used a DJI Phantom just like this, where he flew around protests in Istanbul, Turkey, and was actually getting some really amazing shots of confrontations between the police and protesters.
So in that case, the aerial shots from the drones were the only ones we got of the whole park. And they were, I mean, as far as I know, they were just put on YouTube and websites.
And I believe on the second day that he was flying it around, police shot it out of the sky. You can hear a semi-automatic weapon fire, and then it just falls to the ground.
Gezi Park showed how contentious journalism drones can be over politically sensitive situations. But for technology better known for its military applications, in the world of commercial photography and footage, the argument has been settled. Drone pilot Toby Pocock has never flown his hexacopter to cover breaking news. He puts cameras in the sky for corporate customers instead.
We've got quite a varied range of clients, ranging from the likes of Rolls-Royce right through to property companies. When it comes to drones, they want to put a camera into a position which hasn't been possible before. Helicopters are restricted to how low they can fly, and obviously because we make a lot less noise and we're a lot smaller than a full-size helicopter, it means that we are much more responsive.
A lot of news organizations will pay for exclusive access to the roof of a building, or sending up a helicopter could cost thousands of dollars. But drone technology is tremendously cheaper. The model I use is only a few $100s. It can be flown with a mobile app, so the point of entry at which a journalist can figure out how to use it is very low, and the cost is very low.
Journalists armed with easily available drones have already run into the long arm of the law. In June, a South African filmmaker was arrested after flying a drone around the hospital where the late Nelson Mandela was being treated. In August, police in Switzerland confiscated images taken by a photographer who flew his drone over the wall at a celebrity wedding. In both cases, journalists were criticised for chasing famous faces, and given that the media are often accused of invading the privacy of public figures, could drones give image-hungry news hounds another way to dog their targets? From above?
People ask me all the time, well, what if the paparazzi gets these? What if the paparazzi gets these? One, they already have them. There are laws that bar people from looking in other people's windows, like sneaking up to somebody's house and looking in there, but those laws are often predicated on you being physically on the property. Well, with a UAV, you don't have to be there anymore.
It seems like a natural right not to be photographed against your will in your backyard, fenced in, but drones are promising to violate that. I think a lot of people will be quite understandably creeped out by the idea that if you're outside anywhere in your home, in your backyard, if you're just outside, you may potentially be photographed.
With so many issues unresolved, mainstream media have used drones sparingly, far away from built-up areas where safety issues and regulation are unlikely to be an issue.
There's something about the culture of mainstream media which is normally fairly cautious about pulling in and risking things with new technology. Mainstream media at the moment has been very hesitant to take up drones. The BBC, for example, is going step by step, training their people very slowly. But it's also, there's aspects of drones that slow things down. You've got battery life on small drones is normally quite low, so you can really only fly these things for kind of 15 to 20 minutes. It's hard, you've got to practice a fair bit to get a really good steady shot that tells the story that you want to tell.
Coming at it from a flying point of view, and the fact that we have to be CAA qualified for this, immediately I think of all of the restrictions that we would have on us before you could use it for journalism. Of course, yeah, great, stick a camera up in the air, there's a riot going on down here, or there's something that we need to go and check out. It's fantastic, but they may be breaking rules and regulations to be putting the drone into the air in the first place.
Over the coming months, the organisation responsible for regulating airspace in the US, the FAA, will consider revising laws that restrict drone use. That could mean more experimentation to see how a drone's eye view can enhance news coverage. Because, as with any new technology, it's not about what drones can do, it's about what journalists can do with drones.
I think you are absolutely seeing a period of experimentation. I think that the limitations right now primarily have to do with law and safety. But once those begin to relax, I think you're going to see a lot more creativity in how they're used.
The best scenario would be a genuine discussion about safety and privacy. So we had a reasonable compromise that could exploit these technologies without just kind of surrendering. I think it's much better for policymakers to be proactive rather than looking at technology as some force of nature that just is going to happen, because it's not. You know, we make these things, we can decide how to use them.
More Global Village voices now on drones, journalism, and the issues involved.
I think drones do fall under the same ethical debate that photojournalists have been struggling with for decades. Is it ethical to use a telephoto lens to photograph something that would be impossible to see with the naked eye? Is it ethical to use a hidden camera to photograph someone without them knowing? I do think that drone technology does have the potential to be abused, but it has so much more opportunity to benefit people.
I think privacy is a concern, but it's a bit overstated because this technology is still very limited in its capabilities. But I think the single biggest obstacle for drones to be adopted by journalists is the ease of use. There's still a big learning curve, and we need to get to a point where a journalist can just press a button and the drone takes care of the rest. So basically what we really need is not drones so much as aerial robots.
Finally, a word about smartphones and some of the stupid things we do with them. We know that they've revolutionized communications around the world. We know that without them, we would have never witnessed some of the biggest news stories of our time. But sometimes, like when you're having breakfast or when you're having dinner with your family, or maybe you're out just looking at a tree, maybe that's the time to put the phone down and actually just enjoy the experience. No need to Instagram that moment, no Facebook update required, no need to share it via WhatsApp. Get Off the Phone is a music video put together by Rhett and Link, the YouTube comedy combo we featured a couple of years back. Internet-tainers is what they call themselves. The video has been ratcheting up the clicks on the internet, so we're making it our web video of the week. Although we're not going to kid ourselves, we do realize that a lot of you will be watching this on your phones. See you next time at The Listening Post.
Here we have a man who's chosen the Instagram, his apple pie a la mode. While he fumbles through the filters, his ice cream has gotten a la hot and the pie a la cold. As you can see, this street performer's drawn a crowd to watch him do his thing. But instead of just enjoying the show, it seems everyone's decided to make a documentary. Notice this unreasonably attractive couple enjoying a reasonably priced Italian dinner together. Social networking instead of working, oh, getting to know each other better. How does that filter taste your taste? Since your dessert has gone to waste, when do you think you ever will? Wanna watch this portrait juggling film? You know you want to touch each other. Doesn't that feel good?
He's my brother.
Get off the phone. It's gonna be okay. There's no need to be afraid. Get off the phone. It's gonna be okay.
Hey guys, I'm on the set of our music video. There's Rhett.
Seriously? The government is always spying